Hello everyone, and welcome today to webinar Art and Peacebuilding. My name is Kawther Alkholy. I will be your moderator. I'm the Executive Director of Women for Justice Foundation, and I'm excited to be hosting this session today. First of all, I would like to thank all the participants for joining this event, and thank Dr. Dagmar Reichert, the Executive Director of Arts Foundation, for accepting our invitation to learn us about art and the context in the context of conflict mediation and peace building. Before I hand the mic over to Dr. Dagmar, let me start by saying just a few words about Women for Justice Foundation and a few housekeeping items. Our organization is a Canadian nonprofit aiming at developing and implementing activities that enhance women's participation, boost community development, and promote rights, social justice, peace, and dialogue through advocacy, networking, and researching. Actually, we adopt the peace building approach in our projects, such as She Build Peace. She Build Peace is a global collaborative campaign to support women peace builders through ensuring their safety and protection, fulfilling obligations to make peace and security inclusive, and appreciating and resourcing the critical work women peace builders. The second project is Tanagum Academy. Tanagum Academy is specialized in delivering and organizing online and offline training courses and summer schools in the field of peace and conflict transformations since 2014. So I invite you to stay tuned for our upcoming event, Online Tanagum School for Art and Peace Building, which it will set at the end of November. We will share the exact date and time next month in our website and social media, and we'll send you an email, provide more information and details about this event. The training, which will come in November, is going to be 10 days online training to train African and Asian peace activists and artists aged between 18 and 35 who are living in conflict areas to participate in peace building through arts in their local communities. This online training will be an introductory interactive course which will prepare participants to attend more intense offline practical training workshop in the future. Now today topic is about art and peace approach. In the next 45 minutes, Dr. Dagmar will learn us how art can create a space where people in times of conflict can express themselves, and what are the potential and the limitation of art peacebuilding process. It's an honor to introduce Dr. Dagmar Reichert, the Executive Director of Arts Foundation. She also teaches atheistic theory at the Zurich University of the Arts. Dr. Dagmar studied geography and philosophy in Vienna, Toronto, Stockholm, and Cambridge, and followed an academic career as a visiting professor at the University of Bologna. In terms of housekeeping items, first, today webinar will be available on demand after the live session, and it's accessible through the link which I will share with you in chat. Next, we would love to hear from you during today's presentation. If you have questions for our speaker, please feel free to send it through the Ask and the Question tab at the bottom of your player. And last, we would like to encourage you to share today's webinar with your social networks. So without any further ado, I would like to kick things off by welcoming Dr. Dagmar Reichert. Dr. Dagmar.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining in. It's an honor for me to tell you a little bit about art and peace building from my perspective. I am speaking to you from Switzerland, from Basel, from my office. As has been said before, I run a small Swiss foundation, very small. It's called Art as Foundation, Art as a Basis. And we do art projects in different parts of the world, mainly in the Caucasus. But we learn a lot from similar approaches that are currently done in the Middle East. So I will briefly give an introduction for about 40 to 45 minutes, and then I look forward to your comments, your questions, your critique. Let's just see. I prepared a presentation and I will go through it so that you have something maybe more interesting to see than me and my bookshelf. Okay. Does it work now? I hope so. So art and peace building, it's a field that is growing a lot. Currently, there is much interest in it in the last few years, and many people in many different conflict-affected regions of the world work with art. So I will present you my introduction with some short points. First, when we talk about art, what is meant by it, what is meant by peace building. Most of you, I think, come from the field of peace building, so this will be very short. Then some thoughts on where art could perhaps contribute to peace building, in what situations. Some examples I want to give you about the potential of working with the arts and also the limitations. And then just to express that what I presented you was only like a first glimpse of this field. I want to give some indication where you can find more about it. So let's go right into it. Art, if you are close to the field of art and culture, the meaning of the term art is always contested and questioned. Is such an object like the plate in the lower right corner, is that art, or is the cup that was made by a child in the upper right corner, is that art too? The meaning of art that I want to propose and that we work with would accept that both can be art, and both maybe are different from the machine-produced objects that you see in the lower left. To me, art is an invitation, not only invitation to you, invitation to everyone to relate to the world in a different way than in everyday life. If in everyday life you go shopping, you look at the houses next door, you are not interested in their aesthetic quality. You may be interested, are the neighbors at home or not? But if you relate to the world in an aesthetic way, sometimes you only do that when you have visitors coming from far away. And then you notice maybe the beauty of the facade or some ornaments or things like that. So art has something to do with switching to another relation to the world. And it is a switch to a relation to the world which is not based on functioning, which is not based on need, which is not based on being efficient and fast, but which starts with the incredible wealth of the world and the beauty of the world and abundance. In such a non-functional attitude, you give yourself the permission to experiment, to maybe make a detour, to do something that is not the shortcut to success, but to do something where you can enjoy the sense experience, the experience of what you see, what you hear, what you smell, what you feel with your senses of touch and so on. In art, with art, you can express who you are, and you feel in this relation to the world, you can feel who you are. And through this, through looking again, through hearing again, through stepping out of the usual everyday attitude, there is a chance that you notice something in a new way. So what is art? To me, art is an invitation to relate to the world in a different way than in everyday life. And art is an invitation to what I would call personal sovereignty. Sovereignty is normally a term that is only used for countries, that other countries don't interfere in their affairs. But there's also a personal sovereignty that is the possibility every human being has to enter in this realm of abundance, to go further than the difficult life where all of us need things and feel that we are short of something. So there is the possibility to step into joy, to step into giving to others. And art is an invitation to this kind of relation to the world. Peace building. Yes, I think most of you know this term and use this term a lot. It's, of course, all activities that should promote peace and overcome violence, but for us it is also not just finishing the fighting or disarmament or things like that. It is all this huge field of activities that leads towards a just and positive peace. And just and positive peace, that means accepting the rights of others, free-flowing information, equitable distribution of resources, well-functioning government, and so on. So our question is, how can art contribute to the peace building? How can art be one of the elements that could lead to just and positive peace? Here on this overhead, I wrote down where and when art could play a role or contribute to peace building. The good thing about art is that one can say it is only art. And sometimes this allows artists to do things that others cannot do, that politicians, for example, or human rights activists cannot do. We can see many examples where art can contribute when minority groups or groups in general are not heard. The artists can give such groups a voice or a visibility. Art can contribute in fragile contexts where young people don't have a chance to start their own livelihood, where they're lacking perspective, and where they don't have a chance to show who they are, to show what their abilities are. This is also closely connected to the other point that I mentioned. Art is a way where people can present themselves in their dignity, and they can demand dignity. Like it doesn't matter who you are, but if you stand up and speak a poem, one can feel it. I know many projects where art projects where art is an incentive for people to show their abilities and not stay in a self-definition of being a victim. Of course, they have experienced difficult things, but to go back to things that nobody could take away from them, art is often a way. And for example, in our work, we work a lot in the former states of the former Soviet Union, where self-initiative has been dangerous. We find that art can be used to give people an experience that their self-initiative can lead to something. This is all more or less on an individual level. On the level of society, art can be used to contribute to peace building, where the networks, the tissues of society in a community have been broken, where there is mutual distrust. Art happens in a framed space, in the frame of a picture, in a frame of a stage, in the frame of a photo or a film. And within this frame, things are possible that do not have to be possible outside. So, for example, in theater, one can try out things that one would not dare to do in the everyday life. And this allows to connect, to try out new relations. Sometimes in some countries, expressing a political critique in the form of art is the only possibility that is left for expressing a critique. Here too, one can say, it's only art, or we meant it in a humorous way, or so. Sometimes this can be an important channel. Something great about art is that people can have many interpretations of it, and people are in a way kicked to compare their interpretations. Think of when you watch a film with an open ending and you come out of the cinema and you discuss with your friends, yes, but what do you think? Was it like this or was it like that? So works of art can give a stimulus to public debate, a stimulus to a debate where nobody at the end can be right, but where the different perspectives, comparing the different perspectives is interesting. Then art could be appropriate where there is a stagnation and where one wants to experiment with new possibilities, with new visions. And as a last point that I mentioned here, maybe I forgot some also, I think in some contexts it is not allowed to remember things, and it's sometimes not even allowed to publicly mourn. So art and sometimes rituals can give such a possibility to remember, to express sad feelings. So these are situations where I think art could make a contribution. But now I've been talking a lot, so I want to show you one example of our own work. It is an image from the South Caucasus. It's a settlement for displaced people from the war of 2008 between Georgia and Russia. And this, what you see in the foreground is a settlement for these displaced people. It does not look as bad as the refugee camps in Jordan or in Kenya, but in this region there are several of these camps, and the biggest ones are about for 12,000 people. And the people are in a way parked there since 2008. And what I want to show you now is a short film, about 4 minutes, of a music project, a complaints choir, 2 Finnish artists did with children in this camp. So this will be 4 minutes of video. Okay, so just to say about this project, about the complaints choir, it was that the artists collected complaints from the children, what they did not like in this situation as displaced people in the settlement. And then someone composed a song about it. And then the children who had donated the complaints sang this song. And they sang it in their own settlement, in their own environment, but they also went to the capital city and sang it there publicly. So the idea was to give them a visibility, to have their voices heard, and also to show that they are not just victims, but they would demand their rights. I just wanted to share this one with a project with you as an example. And then from a different part of the world, another example, I have not experienced it personally. It is of the organization Anataban. In the language of South Sudan, this means I am tired. And in this war between different warlords in South Sudan, artists and musicians joined and expressed that they are tired of this war and tired of making other ethnic groups enemies, and that they wanted the people of South Sudan to unite. And so they created murals with this Anataban sign and also concerts. And they were quite successful in that. Now they even got a seat in the peace process. And once the peace process has started, for example, they started an initiative where young people all would wear sunglasses as a sign that we, the people, watch you who are discussing our future. So this is another example. I gave a link to a BBC article about Anataban, but there's also something on Facebook, you can look it up. Another example from this wall between Israel and Palestine from a French artist, GR. You can also find more about it on the internet, but his project consisted in taking photographs of Israelis and Palestinians who in their official kind of description of the conflict always in a way create caricatures of each other, describing the other as a bad person and so on. So the photographer asked the people, please show the face as someone terrible. And then they photographed these people with a wide angle lens and made huge posters. And so you see that humor can hold, in the arts can also play an important role. In the middle here, for example, you see religious people from Christian, from Jewish, and from Muslim faith, who all show to the public how terrible others are describing them, and it turns funny. So this was then posted on this wall of separation in Israel. Later I will give you more examples. Now I want to come to a further point, summarizing in a way what is the potential of art, where I see it. Some things have already been mentioned. In here I kind of separated a bit between how art could contribute to peace building before the violent conflict actually starts off, then what could art do during actual fighting and reigning violence, and then also what art could do in after, when the acute violence has stopped. Before, when one already feels the conflict in the society, art might be able to contribute to create a sphere where people talk to each other, an occasion, as I mentioned before, where people can change opinions. Also mentioned before, art can give a voice to ignored population groups. We have seen that in the Middle East, in many countries in 2011 and since. Very often theater projects are an occasion to invite changes in the conception of oneself or the other. I will give examples of this in a minute. Then also mentioned before, art can open a realm for self-respect and for dignity. Art can provide a stage for people who have lost everything. And last not least, at least in the West, we talk of a creative economy. Sometimes art can provide an income. During the conflict, art can maintain a space for being human, for civilization, and a meeting of people from different sides. And I've mentioned humor. Art can invite the sovereignty of laughter, of stepping outside of the currently pressing situation. We have seen that in many films now about the war in Syria, where the people who are caught, for example, in Aleppo, who were caught in Aleppo, still they joked or they sang songs together. Then after a conflict, sometimes just the mere existence of a concert or a theater performance can be seen as a step back to normal life. In some of our projects, we are just happy to give people an occasion for joy and for diversion. An impulse to leave a victim status behind, I have mentioned this before. It also has to do with showing the ability, showing the culture of people, providing a stage for that. In some art projects, it is possible to bring together members of the formerly opposing groups to do something else together. And often this does not come under the head of peace building, but this comes under the head of who would like to participate in a theater play, or who would want to perform in this orchestra together, or who would do a training in, I don't know, drawing or painting. And those people then who are asked come from different groups, and they create an activity together. There's also a field where art is used to express and treat traumatic experiences. This is a medical field, specialized art therapy. In our own projects, we don't do this, but I wanted to mention it because it is an important field. And in our projects, we often address people who would not seek psychological support. But there are, of course, those people who need psychological support, and there is this field of art therapy, which you might have come across. So just a few examples. Contributing to the creation of a public sphere. This is a project that our organization did in Abkhazia, in the South Caucasus, helping young people to set up a cultural center. They didn't have one before. And here it was a project about visions for the development of their city, and people would draw these visions, and in a in an exhibition, initiate a debate about it. What I mentioned, inviting changes in the conceptions of self and other. This is an example of a dance workshop. Very often it's also gender relations that we work with. It's in the South Caucasus, where this photo has been taken, very stereotyped gender relations, and dance is a field where boys and girls can work together on eye level. This is an example from the Arab organization Action for Hope, and they have started a film school and also a music school in the Bekaa in Lebanon, where they actually provide professional education for young people from these refugee communities from Syria. That's an example of the film school. There's also, you can look it up, the music school that is very successful. Then, as an example that some of you might know better than me, in the time of the actual conflict, it is often existing cultural institutions that maintain a space for human exchange and a space of culture and civilization. And the theater of Beirut apparently has been such a place during the Lebanese war. And another example that some of you might know better than me, poetry can have in some cultures a very important role. So this is a photo of this Somali poet, Maxamed Ibrahim Warsame. People who know his language say that he is of equal standing to Shakespeare or people that we have in our Western culture. And he, in his poetry and in his work, he has constantly worked for peace, for human interaction in the periods of most violent conflict. He even went to prison for that. I talked about returning. Art could be a sign of we are returning in the direction of normal life after violence has stopped. It's a personal image. It's a lady with her 2 grandchildren in a refugee settlement in the Caucasus. And we did a theater performance there. And it was the first time since long time that she could dress up and take the lipstick and go to the performance, and she was so happy about it. It's another image from the South Caucasus. These are all displaced people from Abkhazia, and in a project that started off with cooking, some Swiss artists joined these people, and together they ended up on a stage all together. Another example, again from Action for Hope, from this NGO from the Arab world. It was a storytelling workshop, a theater workshop, where women presented their stories. It is often not so easy to involve women in the art projects. First of all, they are usually very busy, particularly in such difficult situations like refugee settlements and so on. But it's also, they managed to do it, and it was very important when they told their story that everyone could feel that they are not alone with their experiences. And what I want to add is that kind of the frame of the space gives a kind of protection, because in the end one can always say, it was just a fairy tale. Another example, it's from Colombia, from Latin America. There's an organization that invited. What you see on the left-hand side is its paintings by ex-combatants of FARC, of this military organization. And this comes already close probably to art therapy, where they try to express what they have experienced. Often we know of veterans that they say they cannot express it, but that it's not kind of pushed under the table or in the body of these people, but that they can express it. And on the right-hand side, you see a quilt that was, it's one of the quilts that a women's organization also in Colombia produced. They were displaced from their village, and as a remembrance of what has happened, they produced and exhibited after a series of quilts. We are almost at the end. Limitations of art. Of course, art can only be one element in peace building. First, it does not bring any material resources to the regions when we, for example, work in a refugee settlement. And I see this as an advantage. We do not turn people into people who need to accept something. So what we can offer is to share our interest in art and ability. But of course, this is also a limitation, because in some cases, immediately after violence, material support is of course needed. And art can also not directly alter the unjust distribution of material resources. And of course, I have to say that, speaking from Switzerland, art can also not influence, or not influence directly, or not influence immediately the social structures, economic structures of exploitation, structures of non-functioning administration, or discriminating or unjust legal frameworks. Art works in a way on the soul of people, and because of this, it works indirectly. And that also means that often it's very difficult to prove what are the effects of an art project. Maybe we can talk about this later. In practice, many art initiatives may have difficulties reaching certain population groups. I was speaking about women before. And also, like if we want to reach the top decision makers, the presidents or their advisors, it is also sometimes difficult to influence them or influence their awareness through an art project. So you see, art projects can sometimes be shaky and sometimes be very improvised, and often you make many mistakes, but usually it is something that has a lasting effect on people. Not only the people who are in a difficult situation, but also the artists who come to work with them. So what I gave you now is really just a glimpse of a huge field of art and peace building. And here I just list a few questions that one can start from asking from here. So one question is, why is art supposed to have these potentials? What is it about art that should enable it to work in that way? Then for us, it's often a question, who could or who should initiate an art project in a fragile context? Everyone who initiates a project has an agenda, so all this flows in there. And in our very unjust world system, of course, we have to ask what forms of international collaboration are possible in the realm of art. How can we counter this unfair global relations in the sphere of art? Then, of course, how can an art project be professionally organized? What can we learn from the experiences of others? Often people are very busy conducting their own art initiative, and not much energy is left for this professional exchange. So we have to especially focus on that. And then also, I think an important question is that the mind of artists and the mind of representatives of organizations often works differently. Artists do not like to work towards pre-given results, for example. So what does it mean for joint projects, or when art projects are financed by organizations? How can they give artists a freedom to work? So these are points, maybe it will come up now in the Q&A, but these are also points that will be addressed in the training that Kawther mentioned in the beginning, in the Tanagom Art and Peacebuilding training. And I will also introduce now some organizations who keep asking these questions and who are networking between people who are initiating art projects. You get here the link. One is in the United States at Brandeis University. It's called Impact Network. And there also on this website, you also find some videos and films and news in this field. This is an advertisement for our own further education course. We offer it from Arts Foundation and the Zurich University of the Arts. And it focuses particularly on this aspect of international cooperation when you do an art project. It's a 1 year training that you can do beside it's a vocational training. And another last organization I want to mention, it's the organization Landscapes of Hope. It was initiated by Action for Hope, by this organization from the Arab world. And its aim is to connect art initiatives with initiatives in other fields of humanitarian work. It only started about 2 years ago, but you can look it up. So I think this was my initial point. I'm in a way talking into the screen of my computer, so I will now leave this screen and look forward to hear if you have any comments about what I said. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Dr. Dagmar. We will go ahead and take some time for question now. Just a reminder, please be sure to type your questions into the question box in your control panel. It looks like we have a few questions. Anwar asks, from your experience, what are the challenges which face the field of art and conflict transformation in terms of cross-culture challenges?
Mm-hmm. Many projects I know are financed from Western countries. And then even in the field of the arts, you face similar problems that you have in other projects that are financed from foreign countries. It is the question who sets the agenda, whose values are respected? Is there a real financial transparency? So I think in this international work, for me, here are the most important challenges. But I also want to say that in art projects, because very often it is small organizations who do it, and it's very direct contact. It's not through 5 levels of hierarchy. This is really a space where one can get to know each other and one can negotiate things. So yeah, the challenge remains. Yeah.
Okay, we have another question from Farida, Sweden. Thank you so much for a really interesting presentation. Many of the projects you mentioned are art projects in conflict setting. I wonder if you have experience of how art has been included in a broader dialogue process or mediate process.
It's a good question. Our organization has this task to explore if art can play a role in mediation processes. This is not a new idea in many cultures. I showed you this example of the poet from Somalia, for example. Artists have had a role in negotiations, reminding political leaders of their historical responsibility. We also had the griots, for example, in West Africa with that role. And we are exploring this. We are working with the Swiss Foreign Ministry that also has an interest in that. In the field of mediation, internationally, this field has professionalized, and there are kind of standard, that are Western standard ways of mediation that have been promoted by Harvard Business School and so on. And we are wondering if the point is to bring artists into such processes, or whether these processes would not have to change a little bit as well. Because as these processes are now, it's dominated by just words and cerebral activities, and all the other human potentials of working with all senses are left under the table, so to say. So I think it's a field that it is worth exploring, and we are working on it. The people who are working mediation, if it is, for example, ceasefire negotiations, are under very much pressure, and it's not so easy to find an openness that they would see that artists could, or art could support them in a way. But we are working on it.
Well, we have another question from Zainab. Really very interesting presentation. How the artist can convince the diagrams about his project. How can we attend those trainings related in your presentation?
The first question I did not understand. The first part of the question.
How the artist can convince the diagrams about his projects. Maybe the donors or
okay,
grant
yes.
or something
Yes.
like that.
Yes. About this, convincing the donors, personal contacts, telling the stories. There are ways of, in a way, documenting the effect of a project. For example, most important change stories that participants in a project would write. But I think all kind of mindful or experienced donors, they know that it's different to do a project which works on the soul and on the attitude of people is different from drilling water holes. So it's not so easy to prove the success. Therefore, often we try to invite our donors to join the project and see themselves, because when you are present there, you see that it has an effect. And the other part of the question was about,
how can we attend those trainings
ah,
related in your
yeah,
presentation?
I think this Tanagom training, it will be online, so you're
We will
very
contact
welcome.
them.
Yes,
Okay.
and we hope to offer also training in physical presence. And in this training, I mentioned that we do at the Art University in Zurich. We will be able to offer 3 scholarships, but there might be a big interest. So if you can apply, and if you have someone who would fund you, it would of course be easier. But we
Great,
can,
Doctor.
yeah. Mhm.
A third question from Garima. I hope that I pronounced well. In your opinion, madam, what are the challenges of using art in places where solutions on ground are difficult to reach, like situations in Jammu and Kashmir, where there are diverse views and violence posed from terrorism and the state is steering through. There are diverse stakeholders of Kashmir, Hindu, Bandit, and Muslims, and others. How can art help in this complicated
Wow.
situation? Yes, exactly.
Yes, it's a difficult question, of course. I don't have a recipe. But what we have to remember is that in every community there are artists and they are active. And even if it's not possible or too difficult for outsiders to come, um, to look for the artists within the community um, and support each other and network with each other. I know there are, for example, wonderful writers in Kashmir um, that they form a network and support each other. So yeah, artists are there, and as I said before, you don't have to be a professional artist. Sometimes it is like having a diary and writing stories yourself, or drawing yourself and clearing your mind and your soul with that, if nothing else is possible.
The question now from Earl. Hello from Johannesburg, South Africa. Thank you, Dr. Dagmar, for your presentation. I would love to join your endeavors as a musician. My first question, how did you start in arts and peace building? And my second question, what elements have you identified that contribute of this field to be sustainable? Thank you.
Mhm. Well, personally, my point for starting was that my father was in Second World War and experienced bad things, and then I felt how this has affected our whole family. And I was also always asking myself, would reading or theater or music help him to uh, resolve these frozen issues that he had inside of himself? And in the Swiss society, in Europe, art is often like more a leisure time activity. And I wanted to find out if art can also have a more existential role for people who experience different things. And the second, how this field should be sustainable. Actually, I'm not. I'm not worried about this field. I think there is more and more interest in it. I'm worried about that we have to create structures that we improve the quality of our projects more and more, that we learn from each other, that we respect that also in the field of the arts there is professionality in the practices, for example, in conflict sensitivity, for example, in that projects need a certain duration and so on. So I think I'm not worried about the field. I think that we have to do something to raise the quality standard and the exchange in the field.
Okay. Monica asks, thank you for so many rich examples. Art and Peace Coalition, we are looking at how art can take up space for peace in politicalized space like refugee camps or protest by marginalized group. But I also wonder if art that is inspired from the outside can act as a colonizing power by its very essence, or is art always a way to contribute to transformation?
Mm-hmm. It's a good question. In this ongoing process of colonization and exploitation, one can ask is art, or are the interests that are behind an art project also colonizing? For example, if we do a project in the Caucasus about gender roles, we start off from our understanding that boys and girls and men and women should have the same rights and the same possibilities. And this is in contradiction to the traditional roles there. So what right do we have to go there and initiate such a project? I think we always have to ask this ourselves if we are the ones who bring the money and initiate the project. So point one is this constant reflection and check if there are people in the place itself that would support it. And point two is that I would try to orient myself on the universal human rights that also give men and women the same possibilities. So I think it's an ongoing question, and we will only overcome it if we reflect it all the time.
Okay. Mona asks, according to you, how can we protect artists and more generally activists who do art projects, especially in context where extremists and terrorists who refuse artistic expressions represent a real threat to these people's lives?
It's also a very good question. Yeah. In February, we had organized a conference in Zurich about this, and there were a few organizations that are especially kind of working to protect artists. And there are people from the United Nations Human Rights Council. They have a special rapporteur for cultural rights who also try to influence governments to protect artists. But in the end, we have to recognize the courage, but also the danger that artists are facing. And it is often artists themselves who have to evaluate and decide what risks they are able to take. So yes, every week we hear of an artist in prison or artist even killed. It's a problem.
Okay, now the question from Mohammed. Is art valued among the international community towards an interchangeable dialogue?
I think in the international peace-building community, art is receiving growing interest, but it is still considered like a soft factor where the military power, economic power, political pressure and so on are probably correctly considered more important. And on another level, one can say that art can connect people by speaking to a joint humanity. And if we think how powerful music can be, of course, it can also be powerful in mobilizing people against enemies, and it has been used for that. So the power of art can also be used in a negative way. But if you think of what happens through the internet and how, I don't know, Lebanese music groups, the music they sing, it is listened to all over the world, and other things too. So I think art has a possibility to connect people.
Our last question in Q&A tab, but I think some others put some question on chat tab as well. So our last question here from Anonymous: what is the potential of art contribution in traditional conflict resolution intervention like mediation, dialogue, negotiation?
In these like traditional concepts, there's often the distinction between tracks, track 1, 2, 3. So on the level of the general population, track 3, I think there's a lot of possibilities for working with communities with art, addressing tensions that are in communities, healing broken relations through art and so on. On the level of what is called track 2 of community leaders, civil society leaders, I think there is also an openness, and it's often interesting how artists that come from the very community and artists that come from outside, maybe come from communities somewhere else that have been affected by conflict, can work together there. And on the level of track 1, the presidents, the governments, and so on, I think it is still difficult to find ways how what I said before about mediation is an attempt. Often it also works indirectly, that the president has a daughter who studies music, or a wife who is a painter, then the art can work indirectly. But I think these people are so busy and so rushed and so maybe sometimes busy about their ego that it's very difficult to reach them with the arts.
Okay.
I would like, yeah. Okay. May I add one last point? I mean, I don't want to be like the world expert in art and peace building now. There are thousands of people engaged in that, and my voice is only one voice. So I want to encourage all the people interested in that to speak with other people as well. And there are people who have lots of experience that you will learn from. And if I can contribute, I am happy to contribute.
Yeah. We have another question from Toot. Dr. Dagmar, I come from South Sudan, where literacy rate is very low, and interpretation of art meant to create awareness on peace building may be difficult to some citizens. What would be your advice? Thank you.
Mm-hmm. That is, it's not necessary to be literate to have access to the arts. So maybe in your country you can check this Anataban activities. They do concerts, they do poetry readings, they do theater performances, and I mean, this has always been the case that since hundreds of years that people could access important themes through images, through music, through poetry. Even in the, or particularly in South Sudan, I'm sure this is strong. Yeah.
I think we have another question. No, now I think the participant actually wrote some amazing word in the chat tab. Please, Dr. Dagmar, if you have time, you can read it before we finish our webinar. It's look. Thank you, everyone. We appreciate you being here. Dr. Dagmar shared with us the definition of art and peace building. She also gave us idea about art in peace building, where and when we can practice and implement this approach. As well, with examples, she presented the potential and the limitation of art on peace building process. Dr. Dagmar, if you don't have, we have covered all of our questions, and if there is anything else you wanted to cover before we finish our webinar.
No, I just want to thank you, all of you, for your interest, and I hope that it is a starting point for some of you and an encouragement to continue for the others. And I wish you all the best for your work. Goodbye.
Thank you for joining us today, and we will see you next time soon. Thank you.